What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Tuesday, July 23rd edition of the Ship My Money Show Tournament Thoughts. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. We have 11 MLB games tonight. I was just refreshing the weather as the show started. Looks like a couple of games with some weather concerns that didn't exist earlier. Still doesn't look like there's anything that's a total washout right now, but we will have a couple of games that we need to pay attention to. I don't have any games that I factored into the lineups that I built for this show. Right now, obviously, we're still a couple hours from lock. Nothing looks awful, but we will want to keep an eye on the Cincinnati-Atlanta game and the Milwaukee-Chicago game specifically. Those two games look like they could end up having some issues, so pay attention to that. But other than that, should be a pretty fun 11-game slate. It looks a lot like yesterday's, where there's a couple of really good offensive spots and then a lot of offensive spots that look very similar. Pitching is mostly pretty questionable. Not bad pitchers, just like either pitchers that aren't in very good matchups or pitchers that aren't very good at getting strikeouts, but maybe don't give up a ton of power either. So pretty wide open tournament slate, I think. Should be interesting to walk through. I haven't looked yet at what I was getting to, so it'll kind of be a surprise for me. Also, as a reminder, this show is not going to go game by game. If you're looking for that, a slate overview, that's in the morning. You can go back and watch that. But here, I'm just going to dive into what my player exposures would be looking like in the big flagship tournament on DraftKings if that slate had started around 5 o'clock. So obviously, I don't have all the lineups in. You can see up at the top here which lineups I don't have. If there's not a check mark, I didn't have that lineup confirmed when I ran all of my stuff. So some of those lineups probably have come in by now, but that wasn't in time. So I'm just going to go through position by position, talk about what I'm getting to, what I'm not getting to, talk about some of the stacks, why that is. If you have questions, feel free to throw them in chat. Obviously, this, DFS is not a game of there being like one right answer. So if I'm not getting to whatever team you think looks good, that doesn't mean you shouldn't be. Happy to answer questions about what I think about them or whatever you want to ask. So throw those in chat and I will answer those as I get to them. Starting with the pitching here, as you can see the entire time this has been on the screen. Getting to a ton of Chris Sale. I expected that to be the case this morning when I did my morning show. Sale was looking pretty over-owned to me from an optimal standpoint versus his ownership projection, but it's one pitcher, and I don't really think it matters that much. On an 11-game slate, I think I can still make lineups that are plenty contrarian while still getting to a popular Chris Sale. One thing that also is going to make a difference is how you view Garrett Crochet. So I'll just touch on that from the top. You can see over here that I used the wrong set of projections for one, but I have like 10% Crochet. If the slate started right now, the field is projected for a lot more than that. I haven't seen anything. Field projected for about 21%. I haven't seen anything definitive about what to expect from him as far as workload goes. So for now, I am just kind of making my best guess logically at what the White Sox are going to do. What we know is that he threw 28 pitches in 2 innings in his start before the All-Star break. The White Sox had said that they were going to look to limit him as the season went on. Then he pitched an inning or whatever in the All-Star game through, I think, like 18 or 20 pitches. And then we have a very vague quote from the White Sox manager basically saying or implying that the plan for Crochet is not, at least immediately, to continue just pitching him 2 innings at a time like they did before the break. But they did also say that they're going to dwindle his workload down basically as the year goes on, whatever that means. So it was a very, very vague quote. But the other thing to keep in mind contextually is that this is probably Crochet's last start before the All-Star break. Maybe they squeeze in one more. But even if the plan isn't to like shut him down imminently, I don't even know why he's making this start. Like, there is no reason the White Sox should be pitching Garrett Crochet unless they've just decided they're not trading him at all, which is entirely possible. But if they are listening to offers, if they are shopping him, I don't even know why he's pitching today at all. So that makes it really difficult to think that he's likely to just go out there and throw 95 pitches. So I have him projected around like 80 pitches here, less than he normally throws, but still somewhat of a workload, gives him some upside, I guess, because he is such a good strikeout pitcher. But that is less than the field has him projected for. You can see here, I have him at about 15.5 DraftKings points. SaberSim is on the screen at 22. Other industry sources kind of vary between me and SaberSim. I think SaberSim is the high mark. So that impacts me getting to Chris Sale also. If you are watching this show and you just think Garrett Crochet is going to go out there and pitch like normal, or if there's been a quote that I missed or that comes out during this show saying Garrett Crochet is going to pitch like normal, then he's a really good option. He's got the highest strikeout percentage on the slate. He's $9,800. The matchup against Texas is okay. But if you are of the belief that he's probably going to be at least somewhat limited or they're going to be at least somewhat cautious with him, that's just going to make Chris Sale look better because he is one of the only other legitimate high strikeout guys on the slate with a 30+% strikeout percentage. He has a perfectly fine matchup against Cincinnati. He gets Elly De La Cruz from his weaker side of the plate. So how you view Chris Sale is a really good play one way or the other. I would expect to get to him a lot no matter what. But exactly how you view Garrett Crochet is also going to influence how much Chris Sale you get to. Again, if something makes me go from my current Crochet projection to something higher, then Chris Sale naturally is going to come down at least somewhat from this 82% mark. So from a context standpoint, that is something that is worth talking about, that matters a lot. Part of the reason I'm getting so much Sale is that I just have a lower projection on Crochet. Jose Soriano, 40% for me, 22% for the field. He looks like the best value pitcher to me. He has about a 20% strikeout percentage this year, sub 4 xFIP, gets a huge park upgrade going into Seattle, faces a Seattle team that has the highest strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching this year. All of that just looks good. And Andrew Martinez said no Seager in that Rangers lineup. Also true, which again makes Crochet look better than he would have no matter what. But exactly how good matters on how deep into the game you think they're going to let him go. Soriano just looks like to me the best mid-range pitcher value. John Gray at 7K obviously has a good matchup against the White Sox, but I expect him to be limited as well. He hasn't thrown more than 80 pitches in a game since May 15th, which is prior to his stint on the injury list. He came back, had a bunch of starts where he threw like 70 to 80 pitches. His most recent appearance was mop-up duty for an inning out of the bullpen against the Orioles a few days ago. He threw 19 pitches. I'm viewing that basically as just bullpen work, basically a live bullpen to keep him fresh. But I don't really have confidence that John Gray is just going out there and throwing 90 pitches today either. So with him getting some ownership, I think he's okay because of that matchup with the White Sox and the fact he's 7K. But that is enough for me to really like him less than I like Soriano, given the park, given the matchup, and all of that. So I'm happy getting the Soriano here. Zach Wheeler showing up 28% for me, about 20 for the field. Very mediocre matchup for him against Minnesota. They don't strike out a ton. They are a slightly above average team against right-handed pitching, but Wheeler is a very good pitcher. He is one of the best pitchers on the slate. 27% K percentage, 3.46 xFIP this year. And again, how much you're getting to him is going to be impacted by Crochet as well. If someone tells me Crochet is not limited, I would much rather play him at 9,800 than Wheeler at 95. But going under the assumption that I am, that he is at least somewhat limited, that does move Wheeler ahead of him for me, especially at similar ownership projections. That's something else that will play a role is right now I'm operating with the assumption that Wheeler is about 20% owned and Crochet is about 20% owned. So given that I have like a 3 fantasy point difference between them in projection, I'm clearly going to prefer Wheeler. If that were to change to where everybody is now making the same assumption I am on Crochet's pitch count, and so he's 10% owned instead of 20, and Wheeler jumps to 30, then rolling the dice on Crochet and saying, well, maybe I'm wrong and he just throws 90 pitches becomes more appealing. But with ownership as it currently is, I would just rather be getting to Wheeler at a similar price tag. Luis Heel, same thing. I have him projected ahead of Crochet. Most of the industry, I don't think does. So that's making me get to him a little bit more than the field, pretty close. 15% ownership, 16% ownership coming into the field. I got to about 18% on Heel. It's not a good matchup. It's not a good park. Very, very boom or bust spot here for him. He's a very good strikeout pitcher. He has the third highest strikeout percentage on the slate behind Crochet and Sale at 28%. But he also does walk nearly 12% of hitters. He's facing a Mets team that is difficult to strike out. The Mets are getting a big park bump going into Yankee Stadium. So it is a scary spot for Heel, but obviously the ceiling is there. He is very good at getting strikeouts. I don't mind getting him in that 15 to 20% range on a slate where I don't really love a lot of the pitching and where I have concerns about Crochet. I am a little surprised I'm not getting to more Gilbert. He's 10K, which is a little bit more expensive than I would like to pay for him, but he does have a good matchup against the Angels. In the context of this slate, he's one of the better strikeout pitchers, about a 25% K percentage. So again, that's generally a little bit lower than you want to pay for a 10K pitcher, But on this slate, it's one of the better strikeout guys. And you're getting him in a great pitcher's park against an Angels team that has an 89 WRC plus on their active roster against right-handed pitching. So this is somebody that I wouldn't mind getting a bit more of. But again, if I'm not getting him just because I am getting Sale, I am getting Wheeler, I can live with that too. But this is the perfect example of somebody where, if you really like Gilbert and you're playing Gilbert, I wouldn't look at what I'm getting to and back off of him. There's nothing that I dislike about Gilbert. He just ends up not being one of the guys that I'm getting to. He does have a lower K percentage than all of the 9K guys I'm getting to ahead of him. John Gray, I already talked about a bit. Looks like a pretty good point per dollar value. I do have some concerns over exactly what his ceiling looks like. Now, obviously, it's the White Sox. He could just go 5 innings, strike out 8 guys, give up 2 hits, and be really good regardless. But I do have some concerns just, what happens after the 5th inning with him. So I think he's good, but not great at that price, and he is getting some ownership. Jose Barrios, Cooper Criswell, Jake Bloss. I don't really have a lot to say about those guys. They're showing up in a couple lineups. They could just as easily not. Bloss obviously has a good strikeout matchup, but he's not a very good strikeout pitcher, or at least isn't projected to be. It is a good pitcher's park. Criswell, obviously horrible pitcher's park. Good matchup against Colorado. Very, very cheap. Barrios has been dog shit this year, striking out 18% of hitters, 4.5 xFIP. The Rays strike out. They're also getting a park upgrade. So certainly not safe, but at low ownership, if you need to differentiate in a lineup here or there, I think it's fine. My guess or hope would be that, for example, my Barrios lineups are relatively popular. So here you can see a 5-man Yankees stack, 5-3 Yankees Mets. If you look at the ownership of individual players, we have a ton of ownership coming into Sale. The hitters aren't really that popular. I'm actually surprised that ownership projections aren't higher on those Yankees. Here you have Soriano, who's obviously going to be pretty popular. Looks like another Yankee stack, Yankees Mets also. So, he's kind of just randomly showing up in those lineups, save some ownership. He's affordable, but he's not somebody that I really want much of because it's just not very good. Moving over to catcher, Connor Wong showing up the most right now. That's not surprising at all. He'll be popular, projected for about 15% ownership. Just looks good, obviously. Good matchup against Ty Blach in Colorado. He's not one of the guys on the Red Sox that carries pinch hit risk either. That is something that we're going to have to pay a lot of attention to, and it's something that I do know I'm going to be talking about a little bit later in the show, specifically with regard to Rob Refsnyder. We don't have a Red Sox lineup yet, at least as of last I had checked. We're likely to get that same lineup that we got yesterday, where they have the right-handed platoon bats in there, and they have their left-handed normal guys on the bench. We saw it yesterday. Refsnyder, Romy Gonzalez, and Westbrook all got pinch hit for. Obviously, Westbrook homered before that happened. But if we get that same lineup again, the same thing we talked about yesterday applies, where they are going to project as good point per dollar values, but you have to factor in the risk that they aren't finishing out the game, and that changes the way, that their fantasy point distribution works out. So that's something you'll need to pay attention to for some of the Red Sox, depending on the lineup. Connor Wong, though, not one of them. All you really have to worry about with him is that he is popular, but it's an 11-game slate, so there's plenty of low-owned hitters that you can get to offset that. Carlos Narvaez, 2K flat, not anybody that I want really individually, but he's a 2K catcher. That's obviously one of the most appealing positions to punt. The opportunity cost isn't that high. It's basically Connor Wong is good. D'Arnaud's got power. Perez, Contreras, but, generally the weakest position of hitters. So just punting it at 2K, especially if it's in Yankee stacks, I don't mind that at all. Work vet, same thing, just basically punting catcher. Alejandro Kirk, he can hit a little bit, but we can see that outside of Wong, I do tend to be paying down a catcher. We saw that yesterday at second base when I did this show, where I was getting to Foscue and Baldwin from the White Sox. It didn't have to do with them. It just had to do with that was a position that I didn't have a lot of hitters that I liked. There weren't a lot of players that I was building around at that position. So saving money there, getting to the bigger bats that are more expensive that I did want made sense. And you're seeing that today at catcher, basically outside of Connor Wong. Stephen Leibowitz just posted the Red Sox lineup in chat. Duran, Refsnyder, Wong, Devers, O'Neill, Yoshida, Gonzalez, Rafaela, Westbrook. So, yeah, I think that was identical to yesterday. If not, it was really close. Refsnyder, Gonzalez, Westbrook, all very, very big pinch hit risks. You don't have Abreu in the lineup. You don't have Dominic Smith in the lineup. And you don't have David Hamilton in the lineup. They all can just sub in for those guys very, very easily. And so that's most likely what's going to happen. The exceptions to that, of course, are if the Red Sox are just up like 12-0 or something, then you're probably not going to bother matching up. You just tell those guys to enjoy their day off. But generally, you're going to see that those pinch hitters happen. And when you're talking about right-handed platoon guys, it is riskier than left-handed platoon guys also. We'll talk about that potentially, at least if I'm getting to Giants guys, which I may not be. But like the Giants, for example, pretty heavily platoon, but when they're going against a right-handed pitcher, you can still feel a little bit better about their lefties than you do about like their righties when they're going against a lefty, because every bullpen has unlimited right-handed pitchers that they can bring in. Every bullpen also, or at least most bullpens, have a limited number of lefties that they can use to match up. So that's why it's even scarier going to right-handed platoon guys than left-handed. Moving over to first base, getting to Isaac Paredes. I like this one a lot, and it goes with Jason Oder just said in chat. Does the Tampa Bay mini stack make sense for you today? Feels like the cheap guys, Caballero, Palacios, etc., offer some value against Barrios and a bad bullpen. Yeah, this was one where I wasn't sure if I was getting to them. They are my second most utilized stack right now. They're my most used 5-man stack, 4-man stack, 3-man stack. So yeah, I like Tampa Bay. My answer, regardless, was going to be at least that I like them in my head, whether or not I was getting to them. But yeah, it's a park upgrade for them, which is nice. 4.3 implied run total isn't the highest on the slate, but it is a little bit higher than typically you're getting for them, especially if they were playing in Tampa. So you have favorable pricing here with the park upgrade. Barrios, also somebody that has a track record of being a pretty good pitcher, but has really fallen off of a cliff this year. He's given up a lot of power to righties specifically. So Isaac Paredes now first base and third base eligible. Only 6% owned is nice. Affordable at 4,300 in the Rogers Center, which plays up right-handed power. I really like Isaac Paredes a lot. I'm happy to see that I'm getting to him. Nolan Schanuel is very surprising to me. He is only 3,300, and he does negatively correlate with Logan Gilbert, who we saw for whatever reason I wasn't really getting to. But this is one that if he disappears, I would not be upset about. The park sucks for hitting home runs. He doesn't have a ton of power. I think he's purely just like a value play at 3,300. Dominic Smith not in the lineup, so he will go away. Bryce Harper goes without saying. Getting to him when you can is appealing. He's going up against Simeon Woods Richardson. Woods Richardson hasn't been terrible this year, but he doesn't get a lot of strikeouts. He has given up more power to righties than lefties, but I'm not overly concerned about that with Harper. And one other thing with Woods Richardson is his main off-speed pitches to lefties are he throws a changeup about 28% of the time, throws a slider about 23%. He actually doesn't get a lot of swings and misses on his changeup, and he has given up expected power on it. Bryce Harper hits right-handed changeups very, very well. Kyle Schwarber actually struggles with them a little bit. That's not to say that I wouldn't want to get to Kyle Schwarber. If I'm getting to him, I'm fine with that. Obviously, he's good, but it's really difficult to paint a picture of what game plan Woods Richardson would use that actually expects to have success against Harper. It's a really tough matchup for him. He does get more swings and misses on his slider and gives up less power, but Harper just hits everything that he throws well. So I do think Harper, even more than usual, I guess, looks good. Christian Walker, very interesting to me, getting around the field, but he's got a matchup with Alec Marsh. Marsh has given up power to right-handed hitters this year, both in terms of expected power and actual power. Lefties, he's gotten pretty lucky. He's allowed like a 129 actual ISO to lefties, 188 expected. But here, the right-handed bat for Walker, you're not even banking on that regression. He's just gotten lit up by righties all year long as far as power goes. Kauffman Stadium, not good for home runs, but it is good for offense in general. Christian Walker has the power to just do damage in any park, really. So I think he looks fine. Toglia in Coors Field, not a lot to say there. He's playing in Coors Field. So nothing else that I'm really prioritizing here. Seth Brown showing up some. Gavin Sheets batting cleanup for the White Sox is interesting. 3,200 first base outfield. Completely blank. Oh, John Gray for Texas has given up a lot of power to left-handed hitters this year. There is no left-handed power on the White Sox with the exception of Gavin Sheets to target that with. So mostly I just don't really like the White Sox, but Sheets is the guy that if I had to single out a bat from the White Sox, I would want to get to. Lamont Wade mentioned the Giants a little bit. He is one of those left-handed platoon bats where if the Dodgers go to a lefty later in the game, you're probably getting Flores coming in for Wade, but it is more difficult for teams to match up lefty-lefty than righty-righty. So that is a pretty nice price tag on Wade. going up against a completely just like average-ish pitcher in Landon Knack. It is a nice park upgrade, though, for the Giants. Moving over to second base, Motown said going back to Houston today. They fumbled yesterday. I don't know that I ended up with. I don't remember how much of them I ended up with yesterday. But yeah, they sucked. They are in a very comparable situation today, where they're in a park that is bad for hitting, but they are also a really valuable team. Altuve is expensive. Alvarez is expensive. The rest of the lineup is basically free against Oswaldo Vito, who isn't somebody that I'm scared to take Astros bats against. So it's a very, very comparable situation where if they were in a hitter-friendly park, I would love them. In Oakland, I hate that aspect of it. But if you're going to get a lot of the field going to Boston and Coors, and then you're going to kind of get ownership spread out elsewhere, I think Houston, you can build really high upside lineups around them that put you in the situation where if this good Houston lineup actually comes through, you don't really have to worry a lot about your pitching or your one-offs or your mini stacks because you got good hitters around them because they're so cheap. So I think it's a very, very similar spot to yesterday. Jason said back to Yuta's no ball video, right-handed power has some juice. Yeah, that was, I think about that video now every time I mention Paredes, but yeah, pretty good example of that, I think. There was something that I had missed. Oh, Andrew Martinez said, if you knew Crochet isn't going to be limited, would you save the $700 over Sale? They'd be really close. If Sale's getting 40 whatever percent ownership and Crochet is getting 20, and I know Crochet's not limited, I probably play more Crochet than Sale. But what would actually probably happen, and what has happened a lot for me this year, because it seems like Sale and Crochet are always pitching on the same day, is that I would probably just end up playing a lot of both of them. I would probably lose a lot of my Zach Wheeler. I would lose a lot of my Luis Heel, and I would just be turning that into more Garrett Crochet, most likely, if I knew he wasn't going to be limited, more so than replacing Chris Sale with him. John Carlson said came in late, any Mets love. I haven't looked at my stacks to see what I'm getting to. It doesn't look like I'm getting to much of the Mets. I do like the park upgrade for them. The downside is that Luis Heel doesn't give up a lot of power. He basically strikes you out or he walks you, which isn't ideal for hitting home runs in tournaments. The caveat, there are always two caveats to that argument, though. One is that somebody that walks a lot of guys, yeah, it's not great in that at bat, but you are also getting more plate appearances for the team as a whole, which ultimately, does give you some additional upside at some point in the game. The other component, though, is generally, if you're a pitcher that's walking a lot of guys, you're going to be working behind in counts. And in Heel's case, that has frequently just turned into him walking you. But over a larger sample, what you'll see at least sometimes is that you start making more mistakes 3-1. And instead of it just being ball 4 out of the zone, it's a fastball that leaks over the middle of the plate and gets crushed. So that's always kind of a counterpoint to the argument of, there's not upside here because he walks a lot of guys. At some point, he might just start making mistakes over the plate, and those can get hit hard. But to answer the question, I'm not getting to the Mets. I do think that the line to getting to them makes a lot of sense. It's a park upgrade for them. Obviously, Nimmo and Lindor in particular look good, but it doesn't look like I'm really getting to them. At second base, I'm getting to 14% of Nacho Alvarez here. That's pretty much in line with the field. This looks like it looks like I'm punting second base for the most part again today. Alvarez is batting second again for the Braves. He has second base and third base eligibility. He hit really well between AA and AAA this season. He does not project to be an above average hitter for the rest of this season. Depending on what projection site you look at, he kind of goes from average to below average. But one thing I do like about him is, one, he's hitting second and he's 2K, but he did steal 21 bases combined between AA and AAA this year. So at least if I am just punting second base with a min salary guy, it's somebody that can run and you get some stolen base upside. And that goes for Brooks Baldwin as well. I mentioned him yesterday that I was getting there. He's 2K again today. He's fast. So he at least gives you that upside. It really sucks in tournaments just grabbing some cheap guy that doesn't hit home runs and doesn't steal bases. And you're just hoping that they go like 4 for 4 with a couple runs scored or something. At least with Alvarez and Baldwin, they are fast. They will steal bases. Brandon Lau in that spot against Barrios. Toronto is better for right-handed power. Barrios has given up more to righties, but Brandon Lau does have power from the left side. He's 4,400. That's a pretty good price here. Brandon Drury, again, I don't know really why I'm getting to Angels here, but it does at least make some sense in the context of me not getting to Logan Gilbert either. Drury is cheap. He's 3K, multi-position eligibility. That's really the only positive things I have to say about anybody on the Angels is they're cheap. That applied to Shinuel. It applies to Drury. Nico Horner, 4,100 going up against Colin Rea. Rea has given up a lot more power to lefties this year. I don't mind getting two Cubs bats against him here, but I do wish that they had more left-handed power. Ian Happ, I think, looks pretty good. I don't know if I'm getting to him yet, but just kind of talking through the Cubs, I do think Ian Happ looks pretty good. Most of the power in the Cubs lineup is right-handed, though, which isn't ideal against Rea, but he still doesn't get a lot of strikeouts, so you do still have some upside there. Jahmai Jones showing up a little bit. He's actually projected for ownership, leading off second base outfield, 2,600 in Yankee Stadium, going up against Quintana, who doesn't miss a lot of bats. Good value play. I would be cautious of what the rest of your lineups with him look like. Make sure that you're not just playing a bunch of popular hitters around him, because he is probably going to be a popular value option that people go to. So, yeah, he's going to get ownership. He's leading off for the Yankees, and they have like a 5 implied run total. We saw yesterday Victor Robles kind of in a similar spot for the Mariners. They didn't have a 5-run total, but he was like 2,400, batting second, ended up pulling like 25 to 30% ownership in some tournaments, which was outrageous. Hopefully we don't see that kind of ownership come into Jones, or hopefully you do if you happen not to have him and he doesn't do well. But I do think he's going to end up being a pretty popular value option along with Alvarez. Gleyber Torres, 3,500. A little bit less ownership probably coming into him because of Jones. Like, you can roster Jones in the outfield, but if you think about what your Yankee stacks are going to look like, a lot of them you probably would prefer to have Jones at second base, use 2 outfield spots on Judge and Soto, and then obviously there's no shortage of other outfield options that you can get to as far as one-offs go or mini stacks. Generally you're going to have very appealing outfield plays. You also have Verdugo from the Yankees. So I wouldn't be surprised if maybe you do see Torres's ownership get squeezed a little bit. Makes him an interesting tournament option at 3,500. He is projected for a little bit less ownership than Jones as well. Jorge Polanco has been absolute garbage this year, but he is really cheap. He does have he's facing Soriano, which isn't the best matchup. It's not a good park, but he is really cheap. Turang still pretty cheap going up against Tyon, who historically is worse against left-handed hitters. So I'm not prioritizing Turang, but I do think he looks okay. Palacios, same kind of thing. So mostly it looks like Alvarez and Brandon Lau with some Baldwin mixed in as my top second base options right now. Third base, Alvarez again showing up. Rendon showing up a little bit. I really hope this Angel stuff goes away. I just hate it. Like, there's so many low-owned teams I can get to. I would really just like to not be getting to this one. Rafael Devers, clearly going to look good. Lefty, don't care. Coors Field, really good hitter, all of that. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Chris Taylor, if he's in the lineup, offers some value. If he's in the lineup, he doesn't have pinch hit risk, which is nice. They're going up against Jordan Hicks, so you'd be getting him starting against a righty. You're not overly concerned about him getting pinch hit for later in the game. He's not great, and he's hitting at the bottom of the order, but he is cheap, does have multi-position eligibility. Paul DeJong going up against Gray. Again, I prefer lefties against him, but DeJong does have some power. He is cheap, does have MPE. Morel, right-handed power against Rea. Again, wish he were left-handed, but at least he's affordable at 4K. So pretty spread out at third base here, other than, again, just getting to Alvarez. So I have, also just to clarify, because of the way that SaberSim sorts, I have 30% combined Alvarez in these lineups. 14% of it is at second base. 16% is at third base. So I might actually be getting to more Jahmai Jones than I was thinking I was also. 18% Paredes. I had 14% at first base. Jahmai Jones, I'm getting to 16%. So a little over the field there. Some of it in the outfield, some of it at second base. So that is just kind of a quirk in how this is being presented. Yeah, so not getting to tons of any individual guy at third base. I do like the Alvarez value. Obviously, if I can find the salary to get the Devers, that's going to look good. Taylor Walls just kind of punting shortstop here with Tampa Bay. We saw that I was getting to a lot of Tampa stacks, so that positive correlation plays in. I don't like Taylor Walls as a one-off. He's not really good at anything, so other than playing defense. So not the type of individual hitter that I really like getting to, but as part of a stack, perfectly fine, especially if you're not able to pay up for shortstops like Trey Turner. Gunnar Henderson's not on the slate. De La Cruz has a brutal matchup. Bobby Witt Jr. obviously looks really good if you can find the salary. But if you can't get to those guys, paying down for somebody in your stack makes some sense. Tovar on the other side of the Red Sox in Coors, projected around 12% ownership, showing up 12% for me. I think, pretty good play. Dansby Swanson. Looks okay here against Rhea. Colin Rhea is not very good at controlling the running game. So I do think Swanson's kind of interesting there too. Gives you some stolen base upside. He's cheap and he does have some power, even though, once again, Rhea does give up more power to lefties. Trey Turner, you can get to him, great. Woods Richardson has given up more power to right-handed hitters than left-handed hitters so far this year. Bobby Witt, I wish I were getting more. The field's only at 7%. I got to about 6. Todd mentioned in chat that things to get spicy in the Royals game, which, yeah, Witt got hit. Witt doubled, tripled, homered through the first 4 innings yesterday. Got hit by a pitch in his next at-bat. Gabby Moreno got hit in his next at-bat. I don't think the Diamondbacks were actually mad that Gabby Moreno got hit. He kind of just flipped his bat like, yeah, okay, that was obviously coming, and went to first base. The umpires made that, the umpires escalated that entire thing. Jordan Baker was the home plate umpire. He jumped out in front of Moreno, warned both teams. I think if he had just stayed behind the plate and not done anything, nothing would have happened in that game. But there is obviously the potential for that to escalate today. Andrew Martinez said back to second base. Did you get any exposure to Hampson leading off? I don't know. I didn't have that lineup, so no. He's a legitimate pinch hit risk. He gives you some stolen base upside, not much power. He's probably going to have a good point per dollar projection, but he's somebody that I'd be a little concerned about if he's popular. If he's not popular, then, by all means, hope that, he gets it done in his first couple at bats. But if he does end up getting ownership, which is probably pretty likely because he's cheap, he's leading off, KC has a pretty high implied run total, he's probably coming out of the game as soon as Jordan Montgomery does, in his next at-bat. So that's something to keep in mind. But yeah, he will project as a good point per dollar value. Mario said, is JD Davis a bad play? I don't really think that there is such thing as a bad play, especially in MLB DFS. He's batting cleanup for the Yankees. He's got the matchup against Quintana, which is good in this park. You do have pinch hit risk. He probably, once a right-handed pitcher comes into this game for Quintana, you're probably going to get Rice pinch hitting for Davis. So he's in that bucket with Ref Snyder. But he's not somebody that I think I was getting much of. But again, I have 4% at third base. I have none at first base. I think it's probably 2% at first base. I think it's probably his pinch hit risk pulling him down for me. I can look and see what I had him at. Yeah, I had a pretty high pinch hit risk for Davis, so that's probably pulling him down a bit. It makes me have him projected lower than a lot of places in the industry. So again, he's in a good spot. He's affordable. He's in the middle of a lineup that's likely to score a lot of runs, but it's pretty likely he gets a little bit more ownership than warranted, given that he's probably just going to be a little bit over projected. And even more importantly, just sort of again, it's a distribution thing. You can factor in number of at-bats in projections, and it's going to get him a lower projection because of his pitch hit risk. But then you run sims or, you use an optimizer or whatever it is, it's not factoring in. It's probably not factoring it in correctly that, the way the upside is capped by not having those additional at-bats. So, he's fine, but probably does come in over owned given the pinch hit risk there. It is a good matchup against Quintana, though. At shortstop, just talked about that, getting to Taylor Walls, so kind of punting there. I better have good outfielders because mostly I've just punted everything. In the outfield, maybe. Hopefully I'd like to be getting to Judge, Soto, actual good hitters here. We're getting to Ref Snyder. So he was the one I mentioned that I do think I just have too low of a pitch hit risk on him in my projections. He is somebody that I'm definitely going to need to be careful with. He projects pretty well from a point per dollar standpoint, but I think he just has more pinch hit risk than I initially gave him credit for. Sometimes he doesn't. Sometimes they will leave him in, and they certainly could do that today. But the fact that Yoshida's back healthy, so you have Yoshida in the lineup, and then you have Abreu just waiting on the bench. You also have Hamilton. You also have Smith. It just makes it that much easier to pinch hit for him when a right-handed pitcher comes in. The Red Sox don't even have to pick their spots. They have 3 left-handed hitters that are very obvious replacements for the 3 righties in there. So I think that drives up Ref Snyder's pinch hit risk even over what sort of his season average has been. So that is something that when I rerun all of this for my actual lineups, I am going to end up walking that back a little bit. Might still get to him. I mean, he's batting second in Coors Field, but I do think that his pinch hit risk is probably going a little bit understated. I know I underprojected it when I ran these lineups, so I do think that number comes down. Tyler O'Neill, clearly really, really good. Great matchup against the pitcher and block that doesn't miss a lot of bats. Great park. Pretty self-explanatory. Palacios wasn't getting to a lot of them at second base. Am getting to him in the outfield. So again, goes back to my Tampa stacks. And that goes for Josh Lowe as well. Barrios, does give up more power to righties, but Josh Lowe's a good hitter. He's only 4K. I still like getting him here. Victor Robles, we do not, as far as I know, have a Seattle lineup. Talked about him a lot yesterday. Mentioned him earlier that he ended up getting a ton of ownership yesterday. But if he's starting, and especially if he's starting in place of Julio Rodriguez, it does lower his pinch hit risk. If he's starting here against a righty, then there's not a ton of pinch hit risk anyway, but especially more so if like Luke Raley were also in the starting lineup. So what this lineup looks like does impact how much I like Victor Robles. But if he's leading off at 2,400, even though the park's not great, he does give you some stolen base upside. He can hit a little bit. I do like him as a value play. We already talked about Jahmai Jones, Pete Crow Armstrong as a value. Getting into some Schwarber as a pay-up option, I like that. Getting into some Ward, I don't like that. Hilliard in Coors, fine. I like Corbin Carroll here. Mentioned, the Alec Marsh has run really, really good as far as power allowed to lefties this year. His expected ISO allowed to lefties is like 50 to 60 points higher than his actual. But another thing to like about Corbin Carroll here is the park. Well, it's not good for home runs. It's a massive outfield. So not only do you just have balls in play that fall in, but guys with speed like Carroll, like Bobby Witt on the other side, can just take advantage of that, turn singles into doubles, doubles into triples. So you're getting, the extra points from that. You're also just getting them getting on base more because balls fall in and then potentially stealing. So really fast guys like Carroll play really well in Kauffman Stadium. So I like getting there. Randy Arozarena, I wish I were getting more of. I like him a lot here against Barrios. Right-handed power in Rogers Center against a pitcher that doesn't miss a lot of bats, does give up homers. Really, really like getting to Arozarena. Wish I was getting the more, would like to be getting the more. If I could flip-flop him and Ref Snyder, I would have no issue with that. If that ended up happening for me, where I'm playing Arozarena closer to where the field is playing Ref Snyder, and where I'm playing Ref Snyder closer to where the field's playing Arozarena at the same price, I would be perfectly fine with that. I really like Arozarena today as far as just, looking through the matchup. So if we look at the stacks that I'm getting to a lot of Boston overall. That looks like a lot of 2-mans, some 5-mans and 4-mans. But I do think that gets walked back a little bit once I adjust my Ref Snyder projection. Where I am getting to Red Sox 5-man, same as yesterday. Ideally, it's going to be the guys that aren't getting pinch hit for, and then I'll just have a leg up on people that play the cheaper guys, assuming that the cheap guys don't hit home runs in their first couple at bats. So getting, prioritizing in your 5-mans, Duran, Wong, Devers, O'Neill, Yoshida, Rafaela, and, skipping over Ref Snyder, Westbrook, and Gonzalez, or using Boston as 3-mans and going with, any 3 of those 6 guys that don't carry pinch hit risk, and then just hoping that, the Red Sox do some damage, but it's mostly confined to those guys. So I do think I probably end up losing a little bit of those Boston stacks. Tampa Bay, I really like. Happy I'm getting there. Hope that continues. Yankees are fine. You just need to pay attention to ownership. But looking, through projected ownership right now, at least, it doesn't look like they're getting a crazy amount. JD Davis getting 13%. So again, that ownership kind of scares me off of him. I like the idea of stacking the Yankees and just not having the pinch hit risk guy. That's really popular. Aaron Judge's ownership is going to be higher than this. It just is. It's Aaron Judge, but you don't really have crazy ownership coming in here. It's definitely manageable. So as long as that holds, I like getting to the Yankees. They are a team that I think could end up being a little bit higher owned than projected. They're a team that I think maybe if you're playing small field stuff ends up being considerably higher owned than projected. Although in small field, you're just going to see a lot more ownership coming into Boston as well. Cubs, Rockies, Angels. I don't like the Angels. I hope this goes away. I really don't know why it's there, other than I don't have Logan Gilbert, and so negatively correlating against him makes sense. But Logan Gilbert's good. Even though I don't have a lot of him, he's still a good pitcher. I don't expect the Angels to do well. I hate this park. I want the Angels to go away. I hope that they do. But the rest of these are all perfectly defensible to me. Like I said at the top of the show, I basically see this slate as Boston in terms of chances of success, not necessarily in terms of who you play, but Boston, clear number 1 offense. And then everybody else, there's a lot of teams that are mostly good, but they have something working against them. And then there's Boston where everything's good except for the pinch hit risk. So I'm not really surprised to just see like really balanced stacks outside of a couple of spots that stand out at the top. The Cubs going up against Rhea. I mentioned it walking through. I wish the Cubs had more left-handed power, but they do still have pretty good right-handed hitters against a pitcher that doesn't miss a lot of bats. They're not going to get a ton of ownership. Colorado ownership is manageable on the other side of the Red Sox. Atlanta they're just a totally different team. Like the reason they're somewhat appealing now is just totally different than earlier in the year. We're used to them being this offense that if you can get to them, great, but they're really expensive and it's really difficult. Now they're like this value offense where you just grab Alvarez and some other piece and you mini stack them with a better 5-man stack. I'm getting to a couple Atlanta 5-mans, but mostly they're just like a value stack now. Not a great matchup against Nick Martinez. I don't know how deep into the game Martinez will go. He had been working out of the bullpen for the Reds, not throwing a lot of pitches before the All-Star break, but he has had plenty of time. He's had like 10 days to get, bullpen work in, get stretched out a bit. I wouldn't be surprised if you're getting like 4 or 5 innings out of him. So not a great matchup, but you do get some value there. Alvarez obviously pulling that up. I'm interested in Milwaukee. Tyon's having a solid year, but Milwaukee's just a little bit cheaper than they deserve to be or than they have been for most of the year. Turang, Adames, Contreras in particular, pulling that up a little bit, getting into a little bit of these other teams. So very, very spread out with offenses today. And that's not really surprising because, again, I'm pretty concentrated at pitcher, and that generally is how things are going to go. When I'm getting to like 82% of one pitcher, 40% of another, I'm probably going to be pretty spread out. Like if I were to just be playing the same 1 or 2 offenses, then I'm playing a lot of lineups that are really positively correlated with each other. And I don't really want to do that because it's just pigeonholing myself into basically one outcome that gives me a chance to win tournaments. And I have a bunch of lineups competing with themselves in top heavy tournaments. There's a lot of reasons that I don't want to do it. So generally that's what you're going to see. Like if you see my pitching look like this at the start of a show, chances are I'm going to be telling you that I like 15 different offenses later. Looking back through chat, yeah, Criswell hasn't been a gas can, but yeah, he's in course, and that's what it is. So yeah, the Rockies make sense. They're a perfect example of what I was just talking about, where they look mostly good. Like they have a 5-run total, give or take. They're in course field. They're not facing a terrible pitcher, or they're not facing a great pitcher, but they're not facing a terrible pitcher either, and they're just not good offensively. You can kind of say the same for like Arizona and Kansas City. The park isn't good for home runs. It's good for offense, but it's not good for home runs. You have Jordan Montgomery for the Diamondbacks, who's been bad all year. It's a pretty nice spot for KC, but then you have some pinch hit risk with the lineup that they're running out. Alec Marsh is decent. I like Arizona here, but again, it is hard to hit home runs. Same can be said for a lot of these parks, where it's either the hitter friendly parks have bad matchups, the pitcher friendly parks have better matchups. It's a pretty messy slate as far as offenses go. To take a look at anybody that maybe is particularly popular that I'm not getting to. Pitching wise, yeah, not getting to Gilbert as much as the field right now, not getting to Crochet as much as the field. Talked about that. Have a reason for Crochet. Don't have a reason for Gilbert, just how it worked out. John Gray, again, I wouldn't mind if I got a little bit more just because he is so cheap. And as we saw, as we walked through my hitters, like I have a lot of really shitty hitters that I'm getting exposure to. So it wouldn't be the end of the world if I ended up actually playing a little bit more John Gray, hoping he gets me like 16 DraftKings points and I can actually play some legitimate major league hitters. But that's not really how it worked out for me in this initial run. Woods, Richardson, Berrios, Bloss, those guys aren't really getting any ownership. From an offensive standpoint, looking at hitters, Romy Gonzalez was not in. Maybe he was. I'm not sure if I had Romy Gonzalez projected in, but either way, I didn't get to him in the set of lineups that I built, and I'm fine with that. Again, pinch hit risk, 4K. Also, it's not even like he's cheap. Justin Turner, I didn't really get to the Blue Jays. The Blue Jays, I guess, are a team that they're one of those teams, like I was saying at the start of the show, where I'm not getting to them, but if you told me you wanted to play the Blue Jays, cool, perfectly fine. They're like the same as most other teams on this slate. There is one big downside to them. The matchup against Tyler Alexander, who is expected to be the long reliever, is pretty good for Toronto. He's allowed a 235 expected ISO to right-handed hitters this year. This park plays up right-handed power. All of that is good for Turner, Guerrero, Springer, whoever's Kirk, Jansen, if he's in the lineup. I'm not sure off the top of my head, but it's good for the right-handed power in the Blue Jays lineup. The problem is that Sean Armstrong is opening this game for Tampa Bay. So especially for those guys at the top of the order, their first at bat is not a favorable one. And that obviously, just limits their projection and limits, how excited you can get about them. And then you also are getting some ownership. So I think that's why I'm not getting to Toronto, is that you do have that first at bat, most likely for Turner coming against Armstrong, definitely for Guerrero coming against Armstrong, and their ownership isn't really reflecting that. Michael Busch, surprisingly, not getting to, even though I'm getting to the Cubs. He is a left-handed bat that has some power against Rhea. He does have pinch hit risk though, so that's probably driving him down a little bit. Talked about why I'm not getting to JD Davis, Jimenez. I'm just not really getting to Toronto with their ownership. I'd love to be getting more Judge and Soto if I could. Obviously, they're expensive, and I do seem to be prioritizing pitching, so that's probably driving them down a bit. Yeah, so nothing super exciting as far as hitters that I'm not getting to. I don't think ownership in general is just pretty flat today. Marte Carroll, little mini stack from Andrew Martinez. Yeah, I like that a lot. They're both fast. They both can take advantage of Kauffman Stadium. They both have left-handed power against Alec Marsh. So, yeah, that's all I have as far as what my exposures would be looking like if the slate had started about an hour ago. If anybody has any last-minute questions, go ahead and throw them in chat. If not, don't forget to sign up for Endgame Syndicate using the link in the description below. We have our monthly roundtable coming up around in about a week or so. That's for subscribers only. Uticow, Nerdy Tanner, Brick75, myself, answering your questions about DFS, strategy, whatever questions you have. So that is a good reason to sign up now before we do that. We also have a bunch of training videos up already, ranging anywhere from Brick talking about how to make your own projections, Nerdy Tenor talking about different using toy games to explain different DFS strategies and how you should approach things. I've shown step-by-step my process using SaberSim for people that haven't built their own tools. So a lot of that stuff is already up. We have more stuff coming out. We'll be starting to get into football stuff coming soon as well. Motown said one stack to win all the money. I mean, right now I'm hoping it's Tampa. Like, Boston feels like cheating, and I think I'm walking it back anyway. So I hope it's Tampa. Of these teams here at the top, like obviously Boston is self-explanatory. The Yankees are just an obviously good spot. So like of Tampa Bay, the Cubs, the Rockies, this Angels garbage, Atlanta, Milwaukee, the White Sox, the Phillies, like Tampa Bay is the team that I look at and I'm like, okay, good. I'm glad I'm getting there. It's just, I think, a nice mixture of good things, a park upgrade, very reasonable pricing, solid matchup against Barrios. So yeah, Andrew Martinez said, Todd Pierce said Oakland. I mean, that's always a reasonable answer. I compared them the other day to the Orioles from a few years ago. Not as far as like the talent the young talent they have, but just a not very good team that hits like a million home runs once every couple of weeks and just wins you tournaments at no ownership. Andrew Martinez said, would you be limiting the upside of your lineup if you went with Soriano, Gray, and stacked bats? Not really. Soriano has strikeout upside here. And then Gray, you do have upside because one, he's facing the White Sox. He could just end up being efficient and striking out a handful of guys and getting a win and being good at that salary. There's also no guarantee that Gray is actually limited. I think everything points to him probably throwing like 75, 80 pitches or something, but there's a greater than 0% chance that you just look back and go, damn, I would have played a lot of John Gray if I knew he was going to go 7 innings today. So like that's, it's not the most likely outcome, but there is still there's some upside there. And then being able to get to the good bats is obviously fine. It's not like there's a lot of like value bats that I love. There's a lot of value bats in general that are allowing me to get to the ace pitching, but yeah, I think that's perfectly reasonable on this slate. Wookie said Sale Soriano, decent pitching. I hope so. They're likely to be my 2 highest owned guys. So yeah, I'm gonna get out of here. Be back tomorrow morning, 11 a.m. to talk about tomorrow's slate, assuming there's not an early slate. I don't know. I haven't actually looked. I'll be back at some point tomorrow morning to do a game-by-game overview, and then I'll be back tomorrow in the evening with this show again. Thanks for checking it out. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to Endgame, all of that stuff. Good luck on your lineups tonight.